This is really just to kind of hear what's on your minds. We are taking a look at the Enlisted Evaluation System. And, we need to make some adjustments here. And we have a very good system today. We actually have a very, very good system today. But we're having some difficulties over time and, in using that system the way it was designed. So we need to make some adjustments. And primarily, if you were to talk to General Welsh, and what he talks about and what I talk about is we have to get at this point where everybody understands clearly that we value performance first and foremost, and how we document that performance over time, and then how we use that documentation in promotions, assignments, and whatnot is important. It's important to each and every one of you, because it's a great kind of group to be having this discussion with, because it's a great opportunity for you to influence your Air Force and a system that you're going to be using for a very long time. So what do you think?
Well, Chief, it sounds like you guys are taking a good look at it. And, the mark of a great organization and great leaders is to solve problems, preferably before we know that they're even problems, right? And
I guess we're not a mark of a good leader then.
No, I feel like your team is probably on that path.
Yeah.
But there are some notable problems right now, and you hinted at a couple of them. What do you think are the problems with the system that we have in place?
It's probably not what I think is the major problem. It's what I know the major problem is. What it is us. It's the people that are using it. And that's not meant to be disparaging, because it's not. I mean, it's good people trying to take care of people in the best way they know how. And if you actually evaluate people sometimes the way that it's needed for them to be evaluated, you feel like you're not taking care of them. And in some cases, people feel like they are hurting them. And nobody wants to hurt a fellow airman. They just don't. And, it's very easy, and you've had it happen, and you've done it. It's easy to provide accolades to people. It's fairly easy to say somebody's doing a great job, right? It's a little bit more difficult to tell people that they need to improve. It's tough. Because although you may be doing it in a very professional way, and you're doing it because it's your professional responsibility, and it's not personal to you, it is personal to the person that you're giving it to. So if I were to give you feedback that, let's say, was not of the nature of you're doing awesome, and you take that as personal if I said you were doing awesome, right? You'd say, yeah, I feel good. I'm doing awesome. You feel good about that, right? But if I said you weren't doing awesome, and you were doing somewhere that you had some room between where you were and awesome, you'd think differently about that, right? You'd think that didn't make you feel good. So, and I'm the same way. You give me feedback and it's great, I feel good about it. If you give me feedback and it's not so great, I don't feel good about it. That's the challenge. People don't want to make people not feel good about themselves. But we do have a professional responsibility here to let people know how they're performing. It really starts with feedback. And if you've done the proper feedback and you hold people accountable to the feedback that you gave them, then you document their performance in the assessment. So the system is pretty well set up to do that. The challenge with it is we don't always do the feedback the way we should. And you come right out of ALS, I know you talked about some of this stuff. Yes, and you've seen it, and you've all been in long enough to have your own examples of whether you think that's working or not working. So if you do the feedback right, you've started off right. But if you start off wrong and you didn't do the feedback, or if you didn't do the feedback right, if you just said, hey, you're doing great, and didn't give any real constructive feedback or goal setting, or really looked at the person and given them some areas to improve at, well, it's going to be difficult to do anything with the performance assessment, right?
Exactly. And Staff Sergeant DeGracia actually had some good points on the feedback system and potential timelines for the feedback system, possibly to improve it.
And that was my question, Chief. Speaking of the feedback, which I think is very important, instead of the initial feedback within 60 days, should it be sooner than 60 days? And should we do it more often? So instead of just 60 days and then a midterm and another one right before the EPR closes out, should we do maybe every quarter, more often than just 60 days, midterm, and then another one before the EPR closes out?
Yeah,
so
maybe.
Then you're more involved with your airmen.
No, I like that. So yeah, I think that's a pretty valid point. And I think we probably have to look at that throughout the whole evaluation period. It may be important to give feedback sooner and certainly more often. And I think in many cases, Chief Benkin, one of our former Chief Master Sergeant, number 12, he would have told you, you give feedback to people all the time. The 1 minute type of feedback thing, all day long, all the time. You're always giving people feedback. Doesn't always have to be documented or written down. And I subscribe to that too. I think we give each other feedback all the time. You don't always have to be writing it down. But I do think there's great value in writing it down, and maybe more frequency, because it really is real when you put it on paper.
Yes, sir.
If you just said it, you'll find a way to forget it.
Right.
Especially if it was something you didn't want to hear, right? But if you wrote it down and you have to continually go back to it, it kind of holds you accountable to it. So I appreciate what you're saying. I think you're right. We do have what's called the Airman Comprehensive Airman Assessment that we're doing on feedback type 1 that we're working to, that we're pretty close to coming out with, but we've kind of held back on it based on this review of the Enlisted Evaluation System and the EPR, because we do want to very much so link them together.
One of the concerns that I have, and I'm a very young airman. I've only been here.
It's great to be a young airman.
Well, it's very great. But there's also some struggles.
You don't have to get overzealous about it.
Yeah. But one of the struggles is is watching other people while you don't have a lot of experience. And here's an example. I was part of a training for writing bullets. And one of the things that they were very eager about is the language. They were very excited about words like, oh, I saw on the EPR the word quarterback, and that'll really grab somebody's attention. And also they were excited about bringing a gentleman on base who was known for writing good bullets, because all his airmen get accolades. But they recognize that they're getting the accolades because he's a good bullet writer. So my concern as a young airman is my performance being judged or the writing ability of my supervisor.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that had been something that was addressed for the next EPRs.
I think we are talking about how do we document this performance, and clearly document in a way that it shows what the performance was and how much we value it. So I think you're right. I'm not sure that I have ever put a lot of great value on somebody using the word quarterback in an EPR, but somebody might. I mean, they might. I'm not sure that I ever did, but you're right. We do worry about that. We have worried about that for quite some time. Are we giving people credit and assessing their performance based on how well somebody writes, or based on how well they have done? So we do have to look at this in a way that, it doesn't become the skilled writer is the one that has the people that advance. It's really the skilled airmen and their performance that advances. So I think that's a fair statement, and it's one that we have to address as we do this review.
We're talking about, we've been trying to change all the NCOs to fit in the EPR system, because they didn't for a while, and it's still been continuing. This problem is happening. Why wouldn't we just change the system to meet how we're thinking, rather than change how we're thinking to meet the system? And it sounds like you're doing that.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do, because we haven't been able to change the way people are doing it, despite our greatest efforts to do that. And that's okay. Again, none of that's meant to be disparaging. I can appreciate why, and as does your Air Force leadership appreciate why people do they do, although it's frustrating, and it's frustrating for, who this is the most frustrating for? It's frustrating for the people that are being rated.
Absolutely.
When you clearly know you're the best person, you're performing well. I mean, and that's not to mean that you're boasting or anything like that, but you get in your work center, you know how hard you're working. You know who the go-to person is. Yeah. You know who's doing all the work and getting it done, and you know who the people are being kind of pulled along. And if we're not discerning amongst you and documenting that as such in your performance assessment, the real issue here, and always has been, and this is what the frustrating part for our Air Force is it's not about the fact that, we have all these people worried about hurting people. It's really the fact that we're hurting our very best because we're making them look like the rest. Yeah. That's really the shame of it. We do have the very best out there, and we know who they are. But we're documenting everybody else in the same manner, so we're hurting them, and they're not getting the distinct advantage that they should have for those things that I discussed in the beginning, because they've earned it through their performance. So we're going to try to get after that, and the interesting part of this is if at any given day you could almost go to any work center and you could take a supervisor and you could say, okay, these are your 5 airmen and these are the 5 airmen that you rate. You have to tell me who number 1 is and go all the way down through number 5. And at first they tell you, no, I can't do it. And you say that's not an option. You don't have an option not to do that. There's number 1, and there'll be, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and do it. And if they were put to task, they'd do it. And, they'd be the number 1 and they'd be number 5. And certainly number 1 would feel good about being told they were number 1, and number 5 would probably not feel quite as good. But this isn't about a feel-good thing. This is about evaluating people's performance.
How do you feel about the fitness score being added on the EPR for the
member?
member?
I don't feel like that needs to be on there, to be honest with you. So again, you just asked my question. Somebody else could have a different perspective, and I would, I would respect it. Just that. So I'm sharing you my opinion. And the reason for this is it goes back to your point. Does it become a competition? And Is that necessary? And does that mean that's the best performing EP airman because they have a higher score on their fitness than somebody else? Absolutely not. Right. You know, there are a lot of things that can impact your PT score on any given day, right? Lots of things. Yes, and fact is it's a standard, and it's one that we're just looking for you to be able to meet. If you exceed it, and that's great, and we would love to see our airmen exceed it, and we'd love to have a process where people can continue to work on their fitness and improve on it. But to actually give it greater value in the performance assessment, you run risk there, because then you'll have people that, you know, they have had some type of medical condition over time where they can still take and do PT and pass the fitness test, but they're not at their top end of the game anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we all have some anticipation to see how many ratings.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem. You know, you got to be careful. You always like to under-promise and over-deliver. You hate to over-promise and under-deliver. That never goes over too well. So we're trying to set the expectation here in a way that it's realistic. And the expectation is we're going to look at this, and we are looking at this pretty hard. And we're very interested in what you have to say, and I do really thank each and every one of you and appreciate the thought that you've given to this. And somewhat the level of maturity you've put to it, too, because this can be a very emotional discussion, and you've all probably been part of those emotional discussions, as have I with different venues, and that's okay, too. You know, it's because our airmen are passionate about what we do. But, you know, when you're going to try to solve a problem, you got to have to temper those things, you know, and you got to have to step back and, you know, kind of take the emotion out of it and provide a level of professionalism and maturity to it and say, okay, you know, what is it that we're trying to do? How can we do that in the most effective way that has meaning to our airmen and to our Air Force? We'll get after it. I mean, we really will. And it'll be airmen like you that help us get to the right answer in the long run.
Cool.